Elena Brooks gave her heart to a man named Luke Bennett, never knowing he was a millionaire. In just 10 days, he made her believe in forever. Then he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. 3 years later, the millionaire is back, and this time, he's not leaving without her. Crestwood, Tennessee wasn't a place that made the news. It was the kind of town where the days moved slow and the nights were filled with crickets and porch lights, where people still nodded to each other in the street, where the air smelled like pine and old memories. Elena Brooks had lived there her entire life. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich, but she was someone unforgettable to those who truly knew her. At 29, she worked at the town's fading community center, a place held together more by hope than bricks. The paint peeled off the walls. The roof leaked when the wind got mean, but inside magic lived, because Elena was there. She spent her mornings unlocking the center doors before the sun even rose. She'd sweep the dusty floors, wipe down old tables, and set up tiny chairs for children who had almost nothing. Not even breakfast. She brought in donated cereal boxes and secondhand storybooks. She remembered every child's name, every birthday, every dream, no matter how small or wild. She taught them more than just how to read. She taught them that their voices mattered, that they weren't invisible, that someone saw them. Most of the children came from broken homes. Some didn't know where their fathers were. Others flinched at loud noises. They carried the weight of things no child should carry. But around Elena, they could breathe. They could laugh. They could believe. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't chase trends. Her clothes were plain, her hair usually tied back with an old ribbon. But her eyes, they were deep, quiet oceans. And her smile, it had a way of softening even the most stubborn pain. Elena didn't long for fancy vacations or expensive things. Her dream was simple: to open a learning center for every child who'd ever been overlooked. A safe place. A place where color, background, and money meant nothing. But love and learning meant everything. She had tried dating before, sure, but too many men thought she was too serious, too soft, too plain. They didn't see her heart, only what she wasn't. So Elena stopped believing in love stories. She poured all her love into the children instead. And quietly, without asking for anything in return, she became the beating heart of Crestwood. Until one morning, everything changed. The air was hot and still that day. The old AC in the center was broken again. Elena was reading The Velveteen Rabbit to a group of squirmy 6-year-olds. They sat crisscrossed on the floor, sweaty but listening, their eyes wide. And then the door creaked open. She looked up, brushing a curl from her face. And there he stood, Luke Bennett, a stranger, tall, sunburned, wearing worn jeans and a shirt stained with sawdust. He carried a cardboard box filled with old books. "Someone told me y'all might need these," he said, his voice rough and gentle all at once. Elena stood slowly. For a second, she couldn't speak. Not because of his looks, though he was handsome in that rugged, earthy way, but because there was something in his eyes, something quiet, something kind, something broken maybe, just like the kids, just like her. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft. "We always do." Luke looked around. His eyes settled on the kids, then on Elena, then back to the books. He cleared his throat. "You run this place?" She nodded. "As best I can." He smiled, and it wasn't one of those empty smiles you give a stranger. It was slow, real, like something that hadn't been used in a while. "Good work," he said simply. Then he turned to leave. But something made him pause, and Elena felt it too. That strange, heavy silence. The kind that doesn't come from awkwardness. The kind that comes when the universe whispers, "Pay attention." And just like that, something shifted. Something neither of them could name. Not yet. But it was there. Like the beginning of a song just barely heard through a wall. Elena went back to reading to the children, but her voice trembled slightly, and her heart, which had been so still for so long, had started to beat just a little louder. Luke Bennett had planned to stay in Crestwood for just a few weeks. A simple housing project, build some homes, shake some hands, and move on. But from the moment he stepped into that old community center and saw Elena Brooks surrounded by children and storybooks, something deep inside him changed. He came back the next day, and the next. At first, he had an excuse: a shelf to fix, supplies to drop off, a window to patch. But those excuses ran out quickly. Then he started showing up with coffee. 2 cups. He didn't even know how she took hers. But somehow he guessed right. Black with a single sugar. Elena tried not to notice at first. She told herself he was just being kind, that he'd be gone soon, that men like Luke didn't stay. But each day, there he was again, leaning against the doorway, a soft smile tugging at his lips, always watching her with those steady, unreadable eyes. And slowly, the walls she had spent years building began to loosen, brick by careful brick. Their first real conversation happened on the front steps of the community center, right as the sun dipped behind the trees. They talked about books and how both of them still believed in happy endings, even if life had tried to convince them otherwise. Then about music, then about childhood. Before they knew it, the sky was dark and the town was quiet, and neither of them wanted to move. Day 3, Luke showed up with a bag of tools and fixed the broken air conditioning. He didn't say much while he worked, but when he finished, she handed him a peanut butter sandwich she'd packed for herself. He took a bite, smiled, and said, "Best thing I've eaten in weeks." It was dry and falling apart, but she laughed like he'd just tasted a 5-star meal. That was the moment they stopped being strangers. Day 4, they walked down an old trail behind the center, the one that led through the woods. Elena hadn't walked it in years. She warned him about snakes. He pretended not to be scared. The air was still, warm. Sunlight filtered through the trees like gold dust. They didn't talk much on that walk. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't empty. It was comfortable, like two people who didn't have to impress each other. By day 6, the children had started to notice. "Is he your boyfriend, Miss Elena?" One little girl whispered behind her book. Elena's cheeks flushed. She shook her head, but her heart didn't. Day 7, Luke brought his dog, an old retriever named Benny, who instantly adored Elena. She knelt to scratch behind his ears, laughing when Benny plopped his head in her lap like he belonged there. Luke watched with a softness that surprised even him. He didn't know how it was happening, this slow, quiet falling. But it was. Day 8, they went to the town diner. He ordered a double cheeseburger. She had waffles for dinner. They talked for 3 hours, laughing until they cried over the worst dates they'd ever had. "I once went out with a guy who told me I smiled too much," Elena said, half laughing, half embarrassed. Luke looked at her and replied, low and honest, "Then he was blind. Because your smile, it's the best thing in this whole town." Her laughter died in her throat, because she believed him. Day 9, rain threatened, but never came. They sat on the back porch of the center, sharing a slice of peach pie, watching the storm clouds roll past. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move. He just let her stay there. And in that moment, neither of them felt broken. Day 10. Their last day. Though neither of them knew it yet, the day was quiet. Too quiet, like the world itself was holding its breath. They spent the afternoon fixing a cracked swing set behind the center. Elena handed Luke screws while he worked, her hands brushing his. Each touch sent a soft ache through both of them, something unspoken, but burning just beneath the surface. As the sun dipped low, they walked again. No trail this time, just a slow wander through Crestwood's sleepy streets. They ended up on Elena's porch. She made tea. He didn't really like tea, but he drank every sip, and when she stood, brushing a leaf from her skirt, he stood too. So close now. The crickets were loud. The porch light flickered. And then they kissed. It wasn't wild or rushed. It was slow. Software like a promise. Like both of them were scared they'd wake up and find it wasn't real. But it was. In that single moment, Elena stopped doubting. And Luke stopped running. They didn't say, "I love you." They didn't need to. It was in the way his hand stayed in hers long after the kiss, in the way she whispered goodnight like it hurt to let him go, in the way they both looked back, twice, as he walked to his truck. What neither of them knew was that it would be the last time they'd see each other for a long, aching while. But for those 10 days, they had something most people spend a lifetime chasing. Real love. Uncomplicated. Unexplained. Unforgettable. The morning started just like the others. The sun rose soft and golden, stretching across the rooftops of Crestwood. Birds chirped. The air smelled like warm grass and fresh biscuits from the corner diner. Luke Bennett was already dressed. He'd woken up before dawn, unable to sleep. Not because of worry, but because he was finally at peace. He'd never believed in fate, not until Elena Brooks. 10 days had changed something in him, rooted him. He had always lived like a man with his boots halfway out the door. But now he was starting to imagine mornings where she was the first thing he saw. Dinners on the porch, maybe even more. He was supposed to see her that afternoon. He had planned to tell her everything, who he really was, what he owned, the kind of life he could offer her. But more than that, he just wanted to say the words that had been burning in his chest for days. I love you. But fate, as it often does, had its own cruel timing. His phone rang, a number from Texas. He almost ignored it, but something in his gut told him to pick up. Luke, came a frantic voice, his project manager, Miguel. There's been an accident on site. One of the guys, Tommy, he's hurt real bad. We need you back. Now. Luke's world tilted. He ran a hand through his hair, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Tommy was one of the good ones. Young, with a baby girl at home. There was no choice. He packed his truck in under 10 minutes. But before he left, there was one thing he had to do. He rushed to the community center, heart pounding, but the door was locked. No kids, no laughter, no Elena. He called her, no answer, sent a message, no reply. Panic bloomed in his chest. He couldn't leave without telling her. Not like this. So he did the only thing he could. He sat in the front seat of his truck and pulled out an old notepad. The pages were greasy from years of glove box use, but his handwriting was steady. Elena, I didn't want to leave like this. One of my men was hurt back in Texas. I have to go. Right now. These past 10 days have changed me in a way I can't explain. You're not just someone I met. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I was finally home. Please find me. I'll be waiting. Always. Luke. He folded the letter carefully, wrote her name on the front. He walked 2 doors down to an older woman watering her garden. Mrs. Cartwright, Elena's neighbor. He handed her the note. Could you give this to Elena when she comes back? He asked. The woman nodded kindly. Of course, sweetheart. Luke took one last look at the quiet street, at the porch where they kissed, at the world that had finally started to feel right. Then he drove away. Elena came back an hour later. She had been helping a student's mother move out of an abusive home, a long day of sweat and silence. When she returned to the center and found Luke gone, it felt like the floor had dropped beneath her. She waited. Minutes turned to hours. She checked her phone. No texts. No missed calls. She walked to his usual coffee spot. The barista just shook her head. She walked back to her porch, where he had kissed her like she was rare, like she mattered, and it felt like a lie. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. Mrs. Cartwright had meant to give her the letter, but her husband had taken a fall that day. She'd rushed him to the hospital. The note was forgotten, lost between flower pots on her windowsill, under a stack of junk mail and worry. By the time she remembered it, it was too late. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat in the dark trying to understand. Had she imagined the connection? Was she just another woman in a line of passing moments for him? The thought twisted in her gut like a knife, because she had let herself hope. And hope, when it breaks, cuts the deepest. Miles away, in a different town, Luke sat by a hospital bed, watching Tommy breathe through tubes. His hands were stained with dirt and oil and worry, but his mind was on her. He checked his phone. Again and again. He kept thinking, she'll call. She'll understand. She'll find me. But days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Silence. Luke began to wonder if maybe she hadn't felt the same. Maybe she had seen the man he pretended to be. Just another small-town contractor. And lost interest. Maybe those kisses, those long walks, Those quiet moments meant more to him than to her. He didn't know about the letter. He didn't know that Elena cried herself to sleep every night for a week, that she checked the road every morning, hoping a dusty truck would roll back into town, that she told herself, "Don't be foolish. Men don't stay, men always leave." And so, they both sat on opposite ends of heartbreak, each believing they'd been forgotten, each nursing a wound carved not by anger, but by fate and silence, and all the words left unsaid. They had tasted something rare, and now it was gone. But love, real love, doesn't vanish. It waits. It aches quietly in the shadows, until the moment comes to rise again. Luke Bennett had everything a man could want: a thriving business, a luxury home with stone fireplaces and sleek kitchens, a garage full of vehicles he rarely drove, a team that respected him, a bank account that never ran dry. But none of it mattered, not anymore. Because he didn't have Elena Brooks. He tried at first to move on, to bury her memory under work and routine, to forget the way she laughed when she read to the children, the way she leaned her head on his shoulder, the way her eyes searched his face like they were reading a secret no one else could see. He dated other women, pretty women, smart women, but none of them were her. None of them made him feel that stillness, that sense that he had finally found his place in the world. One woman, a violinist from Dallas, told him after 2 months, "You're a good man, Luke, but your heart is somewhere else." He didn't argue. He just nodded, because she was right. 6 months after leaving Crestwood, he returned. He drove all night, didn't tell anyone, just showed up one Sunday morning in the sleepy town where everything had changed. He pulled up to the community center, half hoping she'd be on the porch, reading to a circle of kids, sunlight on her face. But the windows were dark, the doors chained shut. A faded sign on the front read, "Closed. Funding expired." He asked around, at the diner, the hardware store, even the gas station, but no one seemed to know where Elena had gone. "She moved a while back," said Mrs. Cartwright, the elderly neighbor. "Quiet girl, didn't leave a forwarding address, just disappeared." Luke thanked her politely, hiding the way his hands were shaking. As he walked back to his truck, she called out, as if remembering something. "She waited for you, you know, for weeks. Sat on that porch every night until the frost came." That night, Luke sat in his truck outside the abandoned community center. Rain drizzled on the windshield, soft and steady. He held the last photo he had of her, a blurry Polaroid one of the kids had taken during story time. In the picture, she was laughing, eyes bright, hair wild, hopeful. He whispered into the dark cab, "Where did you go?" And something inside him answered, "Find her." So he started searching, not like a man on a casual hunt, but like a soldier on a mission. He hired a private investigator, a quiet man from Nashville named Marcus Field. He gave him everything: names, dates, photos, even a voice recording he had saved from a voicemail she once left. Marcus promised to look into it, but weeks turned into months, and leads turned cold. Still, Luke didn't stop. He changed how he worked, took construction jobs in smaller towns, rural schools, youth centers, anywhere that might attract someone like her. He'd walk into libraries and ask if they had a literacy volunteer named Elena. He donated anonymously to struggling education programs, hoping her name would show up on a receipt. He watched local news stories, community Facebook pages, and school newsletters. Nothing. One day in a town outside Little Rock, he thought he saw her, a woman with dark blonde hair, reading to a group of children in a library corner. His heart leapt, actually leapt, in his chest. He stepped closer, but when she turned around, it wasn't her. Just a stranger with kind eyes. The search became his life. He didn't tell his friends, didn't explain the empty seat beside him at weddings, or the reason he never brought a date. He just smiled and said he was waiting on someone worth the time. No one knew he had already found her, and lost her. On quiet nights, he would sit in his study, the world around him perfectly built and completely hollow. He'd imagine her smile, imagine what she'd say if he ever found her again. Would she be angry? Would she cry? Would she even remember? That was the part that scared him most. The thought that maybe she had let him go, but his heart said otherwise. And Luke had learned to trust the quiet pull inside him, the one that had brought him to her once before. One night, 3 years to the day after that final kiss on her porch, Luke stood in front of his mirror. He looked older now, not tired, just weathered, like a man who had carried something heavy for too long. He touched the small photo of Elena he kept in his wallet. It was frayed now, creased at the corners, but her smile was still there. He whispered one last time, "Please let me find you." Because despite his money, his influence, his success, Luke had come to understand something most men never do. You can buy everything in this world, except the one soul who makes it worth living in. And that soul, Heron always hers. The air in southern Louisiana was thick with heat, but for Luke Bennett, it wasn't the sun that made his heart race. It was the sound of children's laughter echoing through a crumbling schoolyard. It was the scent of wild magnolias mixing with fresh sawdust. It was the sight of a playground alive with hope, the kind of hope he hadn't felt in 3 years. And it was the voice, soft, melodic, warm as a front porch in spring, that stopped him in his tracks. He turned slowly, shielding his eyes from the sun. And there she was, Elena. She stood at the edge of the playground, surrounded by a ring of wide-eyed children. A picture book opened in her hands, her voice carrying gently over the summer air. Her hair was tied back loosely, strands dancing around her cheeks. She wore a simple blue dress, faded with use, spotted with tiny handprints of paint and crayon. But to Luke, she looked like a miracle, like the answer to a prayer whispered night after night into empty rooms. He froze. For one long, aching moment, he couldn't breathe. His hands shook. He had imagined this moment so many times, in dreams, in daydreams. Elena finished the last page of the story. The kids clapped. One little girl hugged her leg. She laughed softly, tucking the book under her arm. Then her eyes lifted, scanning the schoolyard casually, her gaze drifting across the workers, the volunteers, the humming tools, until it stopped. Dead center. On him. Time froze. The book slipped slightly from her fingers. Her lips parted. She blinked, once, slowly, as if unsure if what she saw was real. Luke took a single step forward, and in that instant, everything they had lost, every missed moment, every lonely day, every silent ache, came rushing back. It was as if the world had paused to let them remember. Neither spoke at first. She just looked at him, the way someone might look at a ghost or a wish come true. And he looked at her like a man who'd been lost in the desert and finally found water. Then with hands that trembled, Elena passed her book to one of the older children and stepped forward, slowly, carefully, like walking across a dream. When they stood face to face, inches apart, the air thick with memory, she finally spoke. "Luke?" He smiled, tears threatening the corners of his eyes. "Hey, darling." Her lip trembled. She laughed, a little breathless. "You? What are you doing here?" He tried to answer, tried to say something smooth or poetic, but all that came out was the truth. "I've been looking for you for 3 years." A gasp escaped her throat. Her eyes shimmered. And before either of them could say more, she fell into his arms. Not gently, not carefully. She collapsed into him like someone who had been holding up too much weight for too long, and finally felt safe enough to let go. He wrapped her in his arms, burying his face in her hair, letting the scent of her wrap around his heart again. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They just stood there breathing in each other's nearness, letting their hearts beat in rhythm again. The children watched, curious and grinning. One little boy whispered, "Miss Elena got a boyfriend?" Another girl giggled. "She's crying and smiling at the same time." But Elena didn't care. She pulled back just enough to look up into his eyes. "You came back," she said softly. "I never stopped trying," he whispered. She touched his cheek, fingers trembling. "You left without a goodbye." "I wrote you a letter," he said, his voice cracking. "Gave it to your neighbor. You never got it?" Her eyes widened in shock. "Number I thought you just left." He shook his head, pained. "I waited. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Her voice cracked then, soft, raw. Luke, I never stopped loving you. And that was it. 3 years of silence explained in one breath. 3 years of ache, melted in a single gaze. There in that dusty playground, surrounded by the joyful noise of children, a man who had searched across states and cities, through strangers and sorrow, finally came home. Because home wasn't a place, it was Elena, always had been. She took his hand and led him into the shade, where the kids sat now with juice boxes and crayons. She told him about her program, about how she'd moved from town to town, building literacy camps in poor and mixed-race communities, using books to fight the darkness the world tried to feed them. She showed him drawings kids had made, letters from grateful mothers, photos of her holding hands with children who now believed they were worth something. She had turned her heartbreak into hope, not just for herself, but for hundreds of others. And Luke? He'd never been prouder in his life. He looked around and saw not just her, but the life she had built. A life full of meaning, full of kindness, full of purpose. And he whispered to himself, for no one else to hear, "This is the most beautiful way I could have ever found her." The sun was setting behind the playground. Warm gold spread across the old schoolyard, bathing everything in a soft glow. Luke stood beneath the branches of a willow tree, hands buried in his pockets, watching Elena walk toward him. Her steps were slow, careful, like she was walking across a bridge that had once been broken and wasn't sure if it would hold. Her eyes studied him, not just his face, but the lines that weren't there 3 years ago. The quiet grief tucked behind his smile. The man who had changed, just like she had. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her heart guarded, until he spoke, softly, truthfully, without apology or excuse. "I never stopped looking." Her breath caught, like a paper caught in wind. And then, tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just walked into his arms like she'd been walking toward them for 3 years. Luke held her close, resting his chin on the top of her head, his hands gentle against her back. She smelled like lavender and earth, like home. They didn't say much at first, they didn't need to, because sometimes the heart remembers what the mind forgets. Later that night, they sat beneath the stars on the porch of the little teacher's cottage beside the school. No dinner, no music, just 2 cups of coffee and 1,000 unspoken words. They finally began to fill in the silence. He told her about the letter, how he wrote it in a rush, pouring every feeling into ink, how he left it with the neighbor, thinking it would reach her in a day. She told him how she sat waiting night after night, wondering if he'd ever cared at all, how she almost gave up on love altogether. And then they laughed, softly, sadly, at how close they had come to never finding their way back. But fate, it seemed, had a longer memory than either of them. Luke didn't ask Elena to leave Louisiana. He didn't ask her to give up the children, the dusty library rooms, the scraped-up chalkboards she had painted by hand. Instead, he made her a promise. "Wherever you go to help kids, I'll build you a school." Simple, sincere, and the truest thing he'd ever said. And he kept that promise. Together, they became a quiet force. He built, she taught. He funded, she created. He cleared land and laid bricks, and she filled those walls with love. They didn't talk about race or money in public. They just showed up, in neighborhoods others forgot, in towns where the news never came, in communities where kids had never been told they mattered. They started with one building in Baton Rouge, then another in Mississippi, then Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama. Each school painted in bright colors, each classroom filled with books written by authors of every background, each hallway echoing with laughter, music, and languages of many kinds. Children of all colors walked through those doors, and none of them were turned away. In time, parents began to ask, who are those 2 people building all this? And the answer spread quietly. Just 2 people who fell in love and decided to pass it on. A year after they found each other again, Luke and Elena were married. Not in a church, not in a hotel ballroom, but in the garden behind the very first school they built. in the dirt and sunlight where their story had bloomed. The children helped plant the flowers. The girls picked wild daisies for Elena's hair. The boys built a tiny stage from scrap wood where they sang songs they had written just for the couple. There were no tuxedos, no guest list of the rich or powerful, just a hand-painted sign that read, "Love builds here." Elena wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of wildflowers. Luke wore his work boots and a tie the kids had scribbled with markers. Their vows were whispered through tears, quiet, sacred promises meant only for the two of them. After the ceremony, the kids surrounded them, laughing and singing. Some danced, some hugged them. One little boy climbed onto Luke's shoulders and shouted, "I want a love like this when I grow up." Everyone clapped, even the ones who, once upon a time, had believed that love between people of different lives, different pasts, different dreams, could never last. But it did, and it healed more than two hearts. Because when love is real, it doesn't just bind two people. It teaches, it fights, it rebuilds, and above all, it shines in places where hate once stood. Luke and Elena weren't perfect. They still argued over paint colors and lesson plans. They still had nights when memories haunted them. But now, they had each other, and a mission bigger than their pain. Together, they proved something this world still struggles to believe. That love, true love, is not limited by race, class, distance, or time. It's made of choices, it's made of kindness, and when nurtured, it can change entire communities. So when people ask how they did it, how a construction worker and a quiet teacher found each other and built a legacy, Elena always says, "He didn't save me. I didn't fix him. We just held on and healed everything we touched together."